On this episode, we go on a fun walk for science in Pensacola. Then we study school location in South Carolina. We look at home zones in the United Kingdom. We talk with a director of the Pedestrian Council of Australia. We examine the concept of hypermobility. And finally, we see how a simple solution to a common problem is not foolproof. Stay tuned. We're in Pensacola, Florida, talking with Bruce Landis, who's a vice president with SCI. What is SCI?
John, that stands for Sprinkle Consulting Engineers. We are a transportation planning and design firm doing research throughout Florida and the United States for bicycle and pedestrian network design.
Something interesting going on today. What are these people behind us?
Yes, very much. We're running what's called the FunWalk for Science in Pensacola, Florida. The purpose of the event is to capture the perceptions of walkers in regular street and roadway environments in metropolitan areas. And they'll be scoring the roadways on how safe or comfortable they feel. And we'll be using that information to develop a mathematical model that is used to design new roadways with good high-quality sidewalks, better accommodating for pedestrians.
Putting on something like this is a lot of work. Who have you been working with?
We've been working with the Florida DOT, Department of Transportation, based in Tallahassee, Florida, and some of the local government agencies, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the city, and Escambia County.
And they're going to be covering a variety of different situations today. What sort of things went into deciding where they're going to be walking?
Well, that's a good question because that's a bit of art and science. We wanted to present the participants with a full range of street and roadway conditions that people experience in virtually every metropolitan area in the United States. So they'll be walking along relatively quiet urban street settings with overhanging trees and real nice pedestrian amenities. And they'll also be experiencing some suburban roadway conditions, higher speed, more trucks. And there's some segments where there are no sidewalk facilities at all. So a good range of what typical pedestrian would experience in the United States.
You get back the forms, you run it through the computer, what's going to pop out?
Well, we've developed an initial model, mathematical model, that has several factors in it, measurable and quantifiable roadway conditions, the same type of factors that are used for transportation planners for other modes. What we expect to get out of this event is a statistically calibrated model with thousands of observations on 24 different road segments. We have over 75 participants in the study, and so that should give us a very robust mathematical model that transportation planners and engineers can use for assessing roadway network conditions and using to design new roadways or reconstruction projects.
Is this going to be done elsewhere in the country? How do you build on top of this then?
Well, there'll be some calibration or validation projects throughout Florida and the United States, but we part of the reason that Pensacola was picked was because it is, in a sense, a melting pot. There's a large Navy facility here. In fact, there are a good number of participants that are Navy. So we wanted to have a good melting pot so that it would reflect how most people feel. In fact, I would venture to say that probably half the participants have spent half their adult lives in other areas of the country. So we think it'll be very transferable throughout the rest of the country. And as a matter of fact, there are several representatives here today that are working on the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, an organization that develops design guidelines for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And so we would expect that some of this information will find its way into their national guidelines, which will guide construction, design and construction of roadways.
We're in Charleston, South Carolina, talking with Sam Passmore, who's director of the land use program of the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League. What is the League?
The League is a nonprofit environmental group that works in the coastal plain of South Carolina. We do sort of the traditional type of environmental work, wetlands protection, that kind of thing, and also have a very active land use program that I'm involved in because we are convinced that a lot of the traditional environmental conflicts have their origin in bad planning decisions, bad urban design, bad infrastructure investment decisions.
Recently, you had a study that took a look at schools.
Mm-hmm.
Why would schools be important for land use planning?
Well, just as the location of sewer lines or the location of new roads can influence where growth occurs, so can the location of new schools. And that's a public investment decision that we have had. It's been challenging to get a handle on and understand how those decisions are made so that we could better influence them to have better decisions in terms of school location. And so we did a study over the summer just trying to get a handle on what was going on with school siting and site design. And that led us in the direction of looking at walkability to school as an indicator of whether schools were being integrated into communities well or not.
What did your study find out?
It was very interesting. Part of the study was an interview of leaders at about 200 schools here in the coastal plain, and what we found was that schools that were built in earlier decades that are still being used as schools have higher percentages of students walking and cycling to school, and to the tune of about schools built prior to 1983, students are 4 times more likely to be walking or cycling to school. And that's because they're on smaller sites embedded in communities with strong pedestrian and cycling connections. Whereas the newer schools are on larger sites, on further away from town, and typically with 4 and 5 lane highways between the school and where people are actually living.
What are the implications of all this? I mean, what can be done so that kids can walk to school again?
Well, we can go back and retrofit the existing situation. For instance, any student that lives within 1.5 miles of a school in South Carolina is supposed to walk. You're not entitled to a bus ride unless you can demonstrate that there's some kind of hazard in your way. And schools that are built more recently have more hazards in the way, and hazards can be a 5-lane highway or it could be a drainage ditch. And so we can go back and fix those hazards and put in the sidewalks and the bike paths so kids can walk or cycle to school more easily. In a place like South Carolina, where we do have a lot of population growth and a lot of new school construction, we can begin doing a better job of siting our schools and designing them into the community, putting them on smaller sites, looking at the pedestrian connections, integrating them with housing and shopping and so on, instead of putting them on huge sites far outside of town. One of the things in order to accomplish that is that the state really needs to reform the guidance that it sends down to the districts at the local level. Right now, the state, as most states in the country, establish minimum standards for site size, and they're wildly oversupplying land for schools. For instance, in South Carolina, you are supposed to have at least 20 acres for a new elementary school. Now, that's really, in many settings, completely absurd, and we can educate our children in elementary schools just fine on smaller sites, and hopefully sites that they can actually reach by foot.
We're in London talking with Tim Gill, who's director of the Children's Play Council. What is the Children's Play Council?
Okay, John. Well, the Children's Play Council is a national non-profit organisation based in London, and we basically campaign for the right for the child to play. We try to stimulate better play opportunities for children wherever they live and however old they are, and to raise awareness of the importance of play as a key part of a happy and healthy childhood.
And you have something called National Play Day. What is that?
Right. Yes, that's right. Every year across the UK, hundreds of play people, people who provide services for children who run parks. On the same day, organise local play activities and play celebrations, and we try and get some national messages across in the press and media about the importance of play. So that takes place the first Wednesday in August every year.
And more recently, you've been working with something called Home Zones. What's a home zone?
That's right, yes, Home Zone's one of our biggest campaigns. The idea behind a home zone, it's about creating streets for people, streets where pedestrians and cyclists have priority in the street and where the car driver is a guest. So the idea is to try and create streets where it's safe for children to play, where it's people can walk, neighbours can meet and chat, and really the whole feel and purpose of the street is changed so that it's no longer dominated by the car.
And recently, people took a little trip over to the continent. What's been going on there with home zones?
Right, yeah, you're right. The idea, really, the home zone is an idea that's very common in Germany, in the Netherlands. The Netherlands have had home zones for sort of 25 or 30 years. They call them woonhöfen over there. And they're very popular, they're very common. We went over with a group of both residents and professionals from across the UK last summer, a trip organised by Transport 2000, which is another campaigning non-profit organisation. And we had a look at home zones in about half a dozen cities in the Netherlands and Germany. We went to Cologne, we went to Rijswijk, which is near The Hague, saw some lovely streets and got lots of inspiration about what the streets feel like, and in particular kind of what the people who live in the streets like about them and how they work. And it was very interesting. I think the thing that we found out that was most clear was that it's a lot more about getting people to own the street and feel that the street is theirs, rather than maybe putting in this or that piece of engineering or traffic calming. It really is about giving the streets back to the people who live in them, and that was very inspirational for us.
What's important about that? What do you accomplish once people own their streets again?
Well, it's remarkable what you see. You see a kind of much stronger sense of community. You see people who know each other, who feel positive about the towns and the neighbourhoods they live in, and in particular you see children everywhere, and that for us is vital. That's what we're interested in. We're interested in getting people to realise that for children, part of their daily explorations, the trips, the way that they get to go around the world, to see their friends, to get to school, it all starts from their front door. And if we can make the spaces outside children's houses safe, so that they can make those short trips, then the benefits will be enormous. It's not just about being able to play in the street, it's about giving children confidence, allowing them to socialise, to choose who they want to spend time with and when, about supporting their physical activity, helping them to cycle, so that over time you'll see that children who live in home zones will be more likely to grow up into adults who feel confident and safe and physically able to walk, to find their way around their areas. So it's really about creating the seeds for a healthier and more sustainable society in the future, as well as giving children a sort of a happier childhood and safer neighbourhoods now. So it really is very fundamental to a kind of new vision of local healthy communities.
So now that the idea of home zones has been brought to the UK, what form is it taking here? How is it progressing?
Okay, well, we started campaigning to see home zones introduced into the UK about 3 or 4 years ago, and what's happened is that the idea is really taking off. There's government interest, cities, local residents, other campaigning organisations, all seeing home zones as very relevant to their concerns. So we're pleased to say that last summer, so this was August 1999, the UK government announced a pilot programme of home zones where there'll be 9 pilots across the UK, and they'll be monitored by government to see how effective they are, what differences they make. And they're going to be quite a range of sizes of streets, of budgets, of types of neighbourhood. So we're at the early stages of finding out how to take the home zone idea that's so very successful in Germany, the Netherlands and Denmark, but trying to make it relevant to the UK. So we're quite excited about that. We'd like to see government giving us a bit more support. We think that there's enough arguments and enough people in favour of the idea for us to perhaps be moving ahead a little bit more quickly and looking at directing more city and state funding to the idea and giving the idea a better definition in the law, because that's one of the problems at the moment. But nonetheless, it's clearly an idea whose time has come, and we're very excited about that, and we're still very closely involved in taking the programme forward.
We're talking with Ian Napier, who's one of the founding directors of the Pedestrian Council of Australia. What is the council?
The Pedestrian Council of Australia is essentially a voluntary organisation that is advocating and a voice for the needs of pedestrians in Australia. We were founded in 1996 after a group got together to investigate whether there was a role or a need for an advocacy group and what that should do. And the result was, yes, there indeed was a need for someone to speak for pedestrians, because every other group that shared the road had some form of lobby group or advocacy group speaking for them, but pedestrians didn't.
What are some of the issues you've been dealing with over your short lifetime?
The issues vary from, dare I say it, the pedestrian, the very run-of-the-mill local issues about parking on footpaths, the sight lines because of the positioning of advertising signs around city, the setbacks for parking, things like bullion vans parking on pedestrian crossings and not being booked, to wider issues of how we promote walking as a general activity and trying to set up an organisation that is truly Australia-wide and is there to help the perhaps more local groups deal with the issues that I talked about earlier. And in that regard, we've got a couple of ongoing projects. One is the Walk to Work Day, which we started a couple of years ago in Sydney. And last year it spread to Melbourne and to Canberra, which is the national capital. And we hope in the next couple of years to make it nationwide as a Centenary Federation project. The other national focus was to bring people together last year for a National Pedestrian Summit, and gave them the task of putting together a national or Australian Pedestrian Charter, which had its origins in the European Charter of Pedestrian Rights, which was endorsed by the European Parliament in 1988. And I gather is currently being rewritten. We wanted to use the Charter as a focus for identifying what the issues were for pedestrians, what their rights were, and to use that to highlight these issues and bring them home to the authorities that have to implement these kind of issues. At the moment, the Charter was finalised perhaps in December of last year, and already the government in Western Australia, their Department of Transport, has endorsed it and included it in their walking strategy for Western Australia. And we're hoping that the other states and organisations will endorse this. We have a parallel with the Borough Charter in Australia, which is a conservation document, and it goes back to early 70s, where a group got together to draw up a charter. And although that was a private organization, it has since become the guidelines for all authorities doing conservation work. We'd like to see the Pedestrian Charter have that kind of authority and use. But time will tell. We hope that other national organizations will take a look at our charter in the way that we looked at the European Charter, come back to us with criticisms, quote it where possible, and use it for their own purposes to perhaps chivvy up their own politicians to produce a similar document. And if these kind of documents get wide circulation, then it can only come back to help us, because we can then say, well, look what they're doing, and isn't it about time you took notice of the charter that has actually been produced in Australia?
We're in London talking with John Adams, who's Professor of Geography at University College London. You've talked about hypermobility and hypomobility. What is that?
Well, I begin with hypomobility. That's my term to describe pedestrian societies, old-fashioned pedestrian societies, where everybody spends almost their whole life within 1 or 2 miles of home, and everybody knows everybody, often much too well. And we, over the last few centuries, have moved away from that at quite an impressive rate, and everybody has always believed that this was progress, and indeed I think I agree with them. I don't think I would like to live in a claustrophobic pedestrian village. But I've started worrying about the direction in which we're headed. And if you project the recent trends over the last few decades very far into the future, you end up with a state which I think is equally alarming, and I call that hypermobility, just too much of a good thing. In the hypermobile society, we are hugely spread out. If we travel at great speed, we need more space, so you spread out into sprawling suburbs where there's room to park and room to drive, and shopping changes. All the stores are surrounded by huge parking lots. And there are numerous social consequences of all this that I think are disturbing. And perhaps the one that troubles me most is the consequences for children. In Britain, if you go back to 1971, 80% of 7 and 8-year-old children used to get to school on their own, unaccompanied by an adult. By 1990, when we did a survey, that number had dropped to 9%. And if you were to do the survey now, I think the number would probably be close to 0, because the Department of Transport puts into all primary schools in the country leaflets telling parents that if they allow their children out the front door, if they allow any child under the age of 12 out the front door unaccompanied by an adult, they're irresponsible parents. Now, why are they offering this advice? Well, manifestly the world out there has become much more dangerous. There's far more metal in motion. And when parents are asked why they are now denying their children the freedoms that they used to enjoy as children, the principal reason they give is fear of traffic. But coming up quickly behind, the second reason is fear of strangers. And as we become more mobile, we spend more and more of our time in cars, we spend less and less of our time in the local community. Fewer of us can attach a name to our next door neighbor. The world fills up with strangers. There are other campaigns that run in primary schools in this country, and I suspect in the United States as well, stranger danger campaigns, where children are encouraged not to trust anyone they don't know. Well, this is inculcating paranoia at a tender age. And so we are growing up in a society increasingly filled with strangers, increasingly mistrustful of everyone we don't know.
Not a happy trend. What can be done to improve that future?
Well, I think we've been moving in this bleak direction because we have been conditioned to believe that traveling faster, flying higher is progress. And we have been in the habit of sacrificing just about anything that stands in the way of this progress. I think we simply have to reorder our priorities and start saying, well, we want to value local communities, peaceful, safe streets. We want to value social arrangements which mean we know our next door neighbors rather than living our lives in virtual communities where we communicate via email and fax machines and all of that. And if pursuing these priorities sometimes impedes traditional progress, sometimes stands in the way of the free flow of car traffic, so be it.
We're on Battery Lane in Bethesda, Maryland. It's 4 lanes wide. The roadway takes up most of the right-of-way. As a result, the sidewalk and the utility poles are both squeezed right next to the curb. This can be a problem where the poles block the sidewalk and make it difficult for pedestrians to get by. There are a couple of solutions to that. One would be to move the utility poles out of the sidewalk. Another is to create a wide spot in the sidewalk to create a little extra space for pedestrians to get around the poles. That's what they've done here on Battery Lane. Problem is, with the utility pole right behind me, there's a signpost right in the middle of the wide spot in the sidewalk. Someone in a wheelchair or someone pushing a stroller might have a little trouble squeezing between the pole and the signpost. Whoever was in charge of construction wasn't quite clear on the concept.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.